There is a particular kind of woman in Lagos, the kind whose love is wide enough to be a whole economy. Daniela Okonkwo was that kind of woman. She was 26 when she met David Adeyemi at a mutual friend's birthday party in Surulere, the kind of party where the jollof rice is abundant, but the chairs are not. David was leaning against a wall, looking like a man who had great plans, even if none of them had started yet. He had a voice like warm honey poured over hot bread, and he used it liberally. "You are the most beautiful woman in this room," he told her, within 4 minutes of meeting her. And I say this as someone who has toured the entire room twice. Daniela laughed. That was her first mistake. Not the laughter itself, but the way it made her lean in closer. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. David moved into her apartment in Yaba. Temporarily, he said, because he was between contracts. He was an event planner, or had been one, or was going to be one again soon. The exact timeline was always just a little out of focus, like trying to read text through a foggy window. Daniela worked as a logistics officer at a shipping company in Apapa. She left the house at 5:30 in the morning and returned at 7 in the evening, smelling of paperwork and traffic fumes, while David perfected his jollof rice recipe and kept the remote control warm. "I'm networking," he would explain cheerfully, gesturing at his phone. "Business is about relationships, Daniela. You can't rush relationships." "David," she said one evening, gently, "you have been networking with Chinedu for 11 months, and the only business that has happened is that he borrowed 5,000 naira from you." "Seed money," David said. "That is called seed money. I am investing in the relationship." She said nothing. She went to the kitchen and made pepper soup for both of them. Because she loved him. Because she believed in the version of him that he described so vividly. The one with the thriving events company, the Toyota SUV, the apartment in Lekki Phase 1. That David sounded wonderful. She just hadn't met him yet. The first pregnancy came 18 months in. She was terrified and quietly joyful in the complicated way of a woman who wants something but knows the timing is wrong. When she told David, he sat very still for a long moment. "Daniela," he took her hands. His eyes were tender, almost convincing. "I love you. You know that. But how can I be a father right now? With what? When I get the contract. The big one, it's coming. When I get it and we are stable, then we will have our children. Proper children. Children with everything they need. Can you wait a little longer? For them? For us?" She waited. She bore it in her body and in her heart, and she waited. It happened again. And again. 6 times over 4 years, David held her hands and asked her to wait a little longer. And each time he spoke about the future with such conviction that she almost believed she could see it too. The house, the stability, the children they would have properly when the time was right. Each time, Daniela came home from the clinic alone. Each time, she held herself together like a woman carrying something breakable across a very long distance. Her friend Zara, who had the directness of someone who had run out of patience with nonsense in her mid-20s and never recovered it, was not quiet about her feelings. Daniela, Zara sat across from her at their favorite suya spot in Ikeja, skewers untouched. "I need you to hear me as someone who loves you. That man is eating your food, sleeping in your bed, spending your energy, and now this? 6 times, Daniela. 6. "He's going through a hard season," Daniela said quietly. He has been in a hard season for 4 years. That is not a season, that is a climate. Daniela looked at Hasuya. She did not respond. She was getting very good at silence. Then, the miracle David had promised, delayed but apparently not cancelled, came the job. A proper one. Senior events coordinator at a hospitality firm on the island, with a salary that meant David could finally stop describing himself as a man between opportunities. He was electric with it. He bought new shoes. He took Daniela to a real restaurant and ordered without checking prices, which she noted as a significant development. "You see," he told her over their pepper steak. I told you it would come. Now everything changes." "Everything," Daniela agreed, smiling at him across the table. She meant it in a way he could not quite anticipate. Everything did change. 3 weeks after his first paycheck, David told Daniela, his voice suddenly formal, his eyes pointed somewhere to the left of her face, that he thought it was time for her to go. He had found a place of his own in Lekki. He needed space to grow into the next chapter of his life. Daniela stared at him. "And besides," he added, and here his voice took on a quality she had never heard before, something that had been waiting behind the warmth all this time. "I cannot build a proper future with a woman who has done what you have done. 6 times, Daniela. What kind of mother would you be? What would I tell my family?" The silence that followed was immense. It filled every corner of the apartment she had paid for 4 years while he networked. Daniela picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She turned around once and looked at him, really looked at him. The way you look at a place you are leaving for the last time, committing it to memory not out of love, but out of witness. She said nothing to him. Not yet. But later that night, alone in Zara's guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark with her hands folded in her lap, she spoke quietly. Not to Zara, not to anyone in the room. She spoke the way women speak when they are done being gentle. When grief has finished burning and what is left underneath is something clear and very cold. She told the dark what David had taken from her, and she told the dark what she wished for him in return. Some prayers are said on our knees. Some are said in the dark by women with nothing left to lose. Either way, they tend to be heard. David Adeyemi married Miriam Salako on a Saturday in December at a ceremony so lavish that 3 separate guests posted Instagram videos that went mildly viral. There were 2 cake tiers shaped like a globe, symbolizing David's global vision, apparently, and a saxophone player who played throughout the reception whether anyone wanted him to or not. Miriam was beautiful, educated, and from a good family in Ibadan. She had a laugh that filled every room she entered and a patience that would, over the years, be tested in ways she could not have foreseen at the altar. She loved David genuinely, and she deserved far better than what was coming, which is, unfortunately, a sentence that could apply to most of the women in this story. David's mother, Chief Mrs. Agatha Adeyemi, a woman who wore asoke like armor and referred to herself in the 3rd person when she was making a serious point, approved of Miriam enthusiastically. She had selected her with the precision of someone choosing a mango at the market, examining for firmness, freshness, and most importantly, the promise of sweetness to come. The sweetness Chief Agatha was most interested in was grandchildren. She made this known approximately 2 weeks after the wedding. Miriam. She sat across from her new daughter-in-law over a plate of pounded yam, her reading glasses perched on her nose, even though she was not reading anything. She did this for authority. Agatha Adeyemi did not raise a son this fine for his bloodline to end with him. When is the good news coming? Mama, we just got married, Miriam said pleasantly. And? The wedding night was how long ago? These things do not require a waiting period, my daughter. Miriam smiled with the lower half of her face and excused herself to get more water. 1 year passed, then 2, then 3. David had, by this point, risen considerably at work. He drove a good car, he wore good shoes, several pairs of them. He had become the kind of man who said things like leverage and ecosystem in casual conversation. On paper, his life looked like the exact future he had always described to Daniela across the dinner table in that Yaba apartment she paid for. But the nursery remained empty. The tests came back inconclusive, then normal, all normal, doctors kept saying. Everything looks fine, just keep trying. Stress can be a factor. Have you considered? And David and Miriam kept trying, and nothing happened. And the months stacked up like unpaid bills. Chief Agatha, predictably, did not respond to this situation with quiet grace. She began calling Miriam on Tuesday and Thursday evenings specifically, a schedule so regular that Miriam started experiencing a faint headache every Tuesday afternoon in anticipation.
Miriam, I have been speaking to my pastor, and he says there may be a spiritual blockage on your side.
Good evening, Mama. He recommended a 3-day fast. I have already started on your behalf. You are welcome. Mama. Also, there is a woman in Abeokuta who is very gifted. She helped Sister Bumi's daughter-in-law after 4 years of nothing. 4 years, Miriam. You are only at 3. You still have time, but not much. Miriam held the phone slightly away from her ear and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a woman calculating precisely how many years she had left before she could politely retire to another country. The word barren entered Chief Agatha's vocabulary somewhere around the 2nd year. Deployed initially in hushed tones to her sister, then in slightly less hushed tones to her church women's group, and eventually in a tone that could only be described as conversational, as though it were a weather report. The thing is, she told her friend Mrs. Coker over the phone, loudly enough that David, sitting in the next room, could hear every word. Some women simply cannot carry. It is a medical issue or a spiritual one. Either way, my son cannot suffer because of it. Miriam heard this from the kitchen. She set down the spoon she was holding very carefully, the way you set down something you are choosing not to throw. She had been a good wife, a patient one. She had endured the calendars and the temperatures and the vitamins and the hope, month after month, collapsing and rebuilding like a structure in a flood zone. She had sat across from doctors and smiled and said yes, they were still trying. She had listened to her mother-in-law catalogue her failings to strangers on speakerphone. She was done. The conversation she had with David that evening was quiet and very final. She had not come into this marriage to be measured against her womb and found wanting by a woman who fasted on her behalf without asking. She loved David. She truly had. But love that is paired with humiliation for long enough stops being love and becomes something else, something heavier, something she was no longer willing to carry. She packed carefully, which is always more devastating than packing in a rage. And she left. Chief Agatha, to her credit, took approximately 4 days to grieve Miriam's departure before pivoting with remarkable efficiency to the next solution.
Her name was Zara Bello. Zara was 31, striking, and Chief Agatha had confirmed through a network of informants that would have impressed a mid-level intelligence agency, from a family with a documented history of twins. Twins! On both sides. Chief Agatha presented this information to David as though she was submitting evidence in court. "This one," she said, sliding a photograph across the table, "will not disappoint us." "Mama," David said, "you cannot just..." "David, Agatha Adeyemi is not getting younger. Introduce yourself to the girl." David, who had never in 37 years won an argument with his mother, introduced himself to the girl. Zara Bello was not what Chief Agatha had ordered. She was warm and direct and quietly perceptive, and she noticed within 3 months of their relationship that something about David felt like a house with a locked room in it. Pleasant enough on the surface, but with a door he never opened and didn't like questions about. Still, she tried. They married. A smaller ceremony this time, which Chief Agatha compensated for by being twice as present. The months passed. Zara chatted and hoped and visited clinics and smiled at David across breakfast while internally conducting a running audit of her life choices. Nothing happened. Chief Agatha's calls began. "Zara, I do not want to have this conversation, but Agatha Adeyemi must have grandchildren before she goes to be with the Lord. Are you doing everything the doctor said? Everything? Because I spoke to a woman at my church whose husband's cousin is a specialist in Abuja." "Mama Adeyemi," Zara said, in a voice like a door closing gently but with considerable finality. "With respect, I will not be taking medical advice from someone who has not seen the inside of the clinic. If there is a problem, we will find it together, properly." There was a silence so heavy it had its. It was after Zara's departure that something shifted in Chief Agatha. Slowly, the way a large ship changes direction, with considerable reluctance and much groaning of the hull. She had watched 2 good women leave her son. She had watched 2 years of trying yield nothing. She had fasted, prayed, consulted her pastor, consulted a second pastor, and purchased a quantity of anointing oil that could have lubricated a small vehicle. And still, nothing. She sat in her parlor one evening with her Bible in her lap, and for the first time, she allowed herself to ask the question she had been orbiting for months. What if it was not the women? She called David. David. Her voice was different, quieter. The performance of authority had gone out of it, and what was left was just a mother, tired. "You need to go and do the test. Yourself. Alone. Don't tell me the result until you are ready. But go." David started to say something about how the doctors had already... "David." A pause. "Go." He went. The results came back the following week, and David sat in his car in the clinic parking lot for a very long time, staring at a piece of paper that explained in the polite and clinical language of medical science that the locked room in his house was on his side of the corridor. It had always been on his side. He thought, for the first time in years, thought of a Yaba apartment, a woman who left for work at 5:30 every morning, hands held across a table in the amber light of a restaurant, 6 requests wrapped in the language of love and future, a door closing quietly in the dark. He thought of what she might have said that night, alone, when there was no one left to perform for. The parking lot was very quiet. Somewhere nearby, a generator hummed its indifferent Lagos song. David Adeyemi, for the first time in a very long time, did not have a smooth answer ready. He sat in his car and he felt the full weight of what he had built his comfortable life on top of, and the weight was considerable. He called his mother. "Mama," he said, "it's me." Chief Agatha listened to what her son told her. There was a long silence. "David Adeyemi." Her voice, when it came, was not the voice she used for performance. It was the voice she had used when he was a child and had done something she could not easily forgive. "Those women. You let those women go. You let people call them barren and useless and deficient, and all this time? Mama, no, you will listen to me now." She was not shouting. That was worse. "I raised you. I know your character. But I did not raise you to hide behind women. I did not raise you to let another person carry the shame of something that was in your own body. That girl, the one before all of this, do you think I did not notice? Do you think a mother does not see? You left a woman who gave you everything, David, and then you pointed at her and called her the problem." David said nothing. "Find her," his mother said. "I don't know what you'll say, but find her. And this time, say something true." She hung up. The generator outside David's window kept humming, steady and merciless, as Lagos does. After Zara, David stopped letting his mother select his furniture, his curtains, or his wives. He lived alone in his Lekki apartment. A genuinely nice apartment, it must be said, with good light in the mornings and a view of the lagoon that cost him considerably. He had the things he had always said he wanted. He ate at good restaurants. He wore the shoes. The apartment was very quiet. He had, in the year since the clinic parking lot, done several things his younger self would have found suspicious. He had seen a therapist twice a week, a calm woman in Victoria Island who had the gift of asking simple questions that took 45 minutes to answer. He had called Miriam to apologize, a conversation she received with careful politeness and no warmth whatsoever, which was fair. He had attempted to call Zara, who did not pick up, which was also fair. He had not yet called Daniela. He had picked up his phone to do so on at least 11 separate occasions. He had counted, which was new behavior for him. David had not historically been a counter of things. And each time he had put the phone back down. Because what do you see? What sentence exists that is large enough to cover what he owed her? His therapist suggested he stop looking for the perfect sentence and simply look for the true one. "What is the true thing?" she asked, tilting her head in the way that meant she already knew the answer and was waiting for him to arrive at it on his own. "That I was a coward," David said. "That I let her carry everything and then blamed her for carrying it. That I took the most from her and gave the least back. And then I left, and I used her pain as my justification, because it was easier than admitting that the problem was always..." He stopped. "Was always?" the therapist prompted gently. "Me," he said. "The problem was always me." The therapist wrote something in her notepad. David suspected she wrote the same word every time a client arrived at this particular destination. He suspected the word was finally. It was a Tuesday in March when it happened. An unremarkable Tuesday. The kind Lagos produces in bulk. Hot, slightly hazy, smelling of exhaust and roasting corn from the woman outside his office building, who had been there since before the building existed and would probably outlast it.
David had chosen a restaurant in Onikan for lunch, not the flashiest spot on the island. He had, somewhere in the past year, quietly stopped needing the flashiest spot, but a good one. Warm wooden tables, ceiling fans that actually worked, a menu that did not need to be photographed to justify itself. He was reading something on his phone, waiting for his food, when the door opened. He looked up because the room shifted slightly. Not loudly, not dramatically, the way rooms shift in films. It was subtler than that. It was the shift of something entering a space and filling it without trying. She was wearing yellow. A deep, warm yellow that had no business being that good on a Tuesday afternoon. Her hair was up in a way that looked effortless and had probably taken considerable effort. She was laughing at something. Laughing the way people laugh when they are not performing happiness but simply experiencing it. And behind her, cascading through the door like a small chaotic parade, came 3 children.
As always, before we continue, do let us know where you are watching from. I love to see how far these amazing stories travel. And I know the voice isn't a fan favorite, but it's much better compared to a robotic voice. Enjoy! The eldest, a girl of perhaps 6, was already explaining something at length to no one in particular. The middle one, a boy, was walking with the particular concentration of a child carrying a juice box as though it were a sacred vessel. The youngest was on her hip, one fat hand fisted in the fabric of her yellow dress, gazing around the restaurant with the suffering confidence of a person who has never doubted their own welcome. Behind them, holding the door open, was a man, tall, easy in his posture. The kind of man who holds doors not because he is performing courtesy, but because it simply does not occur to him not to. He caught Daniela's eye across the children's heads and smiled. The small, private smile of someone who has been watching a person they love for years and still finds them remarkable. David recognized her before he had finished the thought. Daniela. The word landed in his chest like something dropped from a height. He had not seen her in 6 years. 6 years, and she had become something. Not in the way of people who change to escape their past, performing a new self for the benefit of anyone who knew the old one. She had become more herself. That was the only way he could describe it. As though the years had stripped away everything that didn't belong, and what remained was just her, distilled, glowing slightly in the afternoon light coming through the restaurant window, with a child on her hip and yellow on her back, and the laugh that still moved through a room like it owned it. She was scanning for a table when she saw him. He watched her face process it. A brief stillness, a single beat, and then something settled in her expression. Not anger, not softness. Something more composed than either. The look of a woman who has already done the work of this moment privately, long ago, and is simply now watching it arrive in real time. David stood up. He was not sure why he stood up. His body made the decision before his mind was consulted. Daniela. Her husband, his name was Tobena, she would tell him later. A good man, an engineer from Enugu, who had learned to braid their daughter's hair because Daniela had asked him once if he'd be willing to learn, and he had said, of course, immediately, as though it were the most natural thing. Put a gentle hand at the small of her back. Not possessive, just present. I am here. You decide. She handed him the baby. Then she walked over to David. They stood near the window, slightly apart from the room. David found that all the sentences he had rehearsed had evaporated. His therapist would have called this growth. It did not feel like growth. It felt like standing on a rooftop with no railing. "You look well," he said, because he had to start somewhere. "I know," Daniela said pleasantly. Not unkindly, just factually. He almost laughed. In another life, in another version of this moment, it would have been funny. It was still a little funny, actually. He had forgotten that about her. That she could be precise in a way that landed like a small, clean cut you didn't feel until you were already walking away. "Daniela." He looked at her properly. "I owe you an apology. Not a small one. Not a polished one. I have been trying to find the right words for a year, and I don't think they exist. So I'm just going to say the true thing." He paused. "I was wrong. Everything I asked of you, the way I asked it, and then what I said when I left, all of it. I was a coward and I was cruel, and you deserve none of it. None of it was your fault. I know that now in a way I cannot unknow." He stopped. The restaurant moved gently around them. Cutlery, low conversation. The middle child now audibly negotiating with his father about something involving chips. Daniela looked at him for a long moment. Not with softness, not with coldness, with clarity. The look of a woman who has processed a thing thoroughly and come out the other side of it carrying only what she chose to keep. "David," she said, "I accept your apology." A pause. "And I want you to hear me say something clearly because I think you need to hear it." She tilted her head slightly, and for a moment, she reminded him of his therapist, which was unsettling. "You did not break me. I want you to know that. Not for your comfort, but for the truth of it. I grieved properly. And then I healed. And then I built something." She glanced back at her table, where Tobena was cutting up something for the eldest, his face bent to the task with total attention. The baby was banging a spoon on the table with tremendous satisfaction. "I built something real." "I can see that," David said quietly. "The life I have," she continued, "my husband, my children, none of that was a consolation prize, David. It was the life, the actual life. It just needed you to leave before I could find it." She said this without malice. That was what undid him slightly, the absence of malice. If she had been angry, he could have defended against it. But she was simply telling him the truth, calmly, the way you tell someone a fact about the weather. "I'm glad," he said. He meant it. He was surprised to find that he meant it completely. "Good." She nodded once, with a kind of finality that was also somehow a mercy. Then something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. "Take care of yourself, David. See a doctor. See a therapist, if you haven't already." He blinked. "If you haven't already." "I have, actually," he said. "Good," she said again. And then, simply, "Goodbye." She walked back to her table. Tobena looked up when she arrived, and she touched his shoulder briefly. A small, instinctive gesture. The kind that belongs to people who have made a home in each other. And sat down. The eldest climbed immediately into her lap. The middle one offered her a chip from his plate with great generosity. The baby grabbed her finger and held on. David stood by the window for a moment longer. Then he returned to his table and sat down.
His food had arrived while he was standing. It was getting slightly cold. He ate it anyway, slowly, watching nothing in particular, feeling something he couldn't immediately name, something that was not quite peace, but was in the same neighborhood, something that felt like the beginning of an honest accounting. Not comfortable, but real. He paid his bill, tipped generously. He had recently begun tipping generously, another development his therapist had noted without comment, and walked out into the Onikan afternoon. He called his mother from the car. "I saw her," he said. A pause. Then, in a voice that was softer than her usual register. "And?" "She's well, Mama. She's really well. She has a family. She's happy." Another pause. He could hear his mother breathing steadily on the other end of the line, and he thought, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that she was getting older, and that he had put lines on her face that didn't belong there. "Good," Chief Agatha said at last, and her voice carried something in it that sounded like relief, and also like an old woman setting down a weight she had been carrying for a long time without admitting it. "Good. Then let her be well. And you go and learn how to be well also. A bit. And David." "Yes, Mama. Next time I try to select a wife for you, you have my permission to refuse me, loudly if necessary." David, for the first time in what felt like a very long time, laughed. A real one. Unprepared, slightly undignified, the kind that happens when something true and unexpected arrives at the same time. "Yes, Mama," he said. "I'll remember that." He started the car. Outside, the woman who sold roasted corn near his office building, who had been there before the building and would outlast it, was packing up her stall for the afternoon, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly what she's doing and has always known. Lagos hummed around him. The same city, the same roads, slightly different man. He drove home.